If you have a Bible and you like to follow along, please turn it to the 22nd chapter of Luke. This is where we'll be spending our time today. This is a good text, at least in my mind it is, because it shows me some things about God and about living here in this world as a believer that it's good to be reminded of. All of us in this room probably can look back in our life and see a place where we made certain decisions that really weren't good ones. And because of that, we look back at that portion of our life and we say, this is a portion of life wherein I failed. But failure is a really good teacher. It teaches us things you just can't learn by somebody standing up and telling us and pointing a finger at us and telling us what we should and shouldn't do. I mean, I'll never forget when Jackson was probably 7, 5, maybe younger, 6. I don't remember. We were here in this church, so he had to be at least 6. And we went home, and Becky was cooking. And we have one of those glass top stoves, you really can't tell that it's hot. When you turn them off, it's still blazing hot, but it doesn't, nothing showing, so you don't. And I remember Jackson was standing there. He was about this high, so he had to be 5 or 6 anyway. And I said, he started fiddling around on top of the stove. I said, buddy, don't put your hand up there. That's really hot. Well, what does he do? Just takes his hand and rubs it right straight across the burner. I mean, this burner had just been glowing. If you laid a piece of paper on it, it would burst into flames. And at first, when it burns you that bad, you don't feel anything. Right. His fingers all turned white. It had burned the skin to where it was ash. Oh. That's how bad. All right, for the next 2.5 hours, he cried so hard and so loud. We ran water, we gave him ice, we did butter, we did everything we could think of. He cried so hard, Becky just had to leave the room. She couldn't take it anymore. I mean, it was just, 6 inches from your face, just screaming. His fingers all swelled up to where they looked like you'd put a cat's eye marble under the skin on every one of them. Big bubbles up there. He never did that again. Didn't take but that one time. So failure is a place where we get to learn stuff we just can't learn in another way. Peter is going to be aware of a fact that he's going to fail. And he's going to learn something that he couldn't learn otherwise. Let's take a look at the text. It's Luke chapter 22. And I'm going to start as soon as I get there. Sorry. Still in Sunday school afterburn. In verse 31. Simon, pay attention, Jesus says to Peter. Satan has demanded to have all of you and to sift you like wheat. But I've prayed for you, Simon, that your faith won't fail. And when you've turned back from your failure, you will strengthen your brothers. Peter said, Lord, I'm ready to go to prison and to death with you. Jesus replied, I tell you, Peter, the rooster will not crow today until you've denied 3 times that you even know me. Jesus said, when I sent you out with no money bag, speaking to the other disciples, or a traveler's bag or sandals, you didn't lack anything, did you? They replied, we lack nothing. Jesus said, but now, if you've got a money bag, take it. If you have a traveler's bag, take that as well. If you have no sword, sell your cloak and go buy a sword. For I tell you that the scripture must be fulfilled in me. And speaking of Isaiah here, he said, and he was counted among the transgressors. For what is written about me is being fulfilled. And so the disciples said to Jesus, look, Lord, here are 2 swords. Jesus said, it's enough. Now, Jesus is opening a window for these guys here. And he's opening a window into a supernatural realm they can't see. He can see it, but they cannot. Jesus looks ahead here, and he knows something about Peter's life wherein Peter is going to fail. He's going to fail terribly. And Peter, of course, being who he is, and I would say a lot of us are like this, he just thinks, is everybody comfortable? Is it still warm enough in here? Is it still too cool?
Cool.
It's cool. Okay. I know how to fix that. Peter thinks he's just invincible. This reminds me, if on a Wednesday night, not too long ago, a friend of ours was here on a Wednesday night, hadn't been here in a while, and he gave me what I will call is the Columbine hypothetical. He said, Rip, I could imitate him and then you know who it was, but I'm not going to do it. He said, Rip, what would you do if you were in Columbine or you were a place like that and somebody came into a room and the first person they came to, not you, but somebody else, and they said, are you a Christian? And then they said yes, and they shot him. And then they got to you, what would you do? Well, I answered it as honestly as I knew how. I said, I don't know what I would do. I would do whatever God would empower me to be able to do in that moment. I believe that. But I don't know what I would do. Take the bullet and confess Jesus or not? It's a really hard question to answer. And I think the only honest answer any of us in this room can honestly give is, I would do whatever God would enable me to do. That's the right answer, I think. Well, Peter's going to fail here. Jesus is predicting it. But in that failure, I would never question Peter's loyalty to Jesus. He is absolutely loyal to Jesus. And I believe of any of us in this room, we are loyal to Jesus. I believe that. So it's not a question of loyalty. Peter is going to be pushed into a place where he's just going to be out of his human depth. Just like some of us might get pushed to a place where we're out of our human depth. We don't have the human resources to do that which might be asked of us in a particular situation. We just don't have it. That's why the answer is, I'll do whatever God will enable me to do. But I believe Him sufficiently that He would enable me. Think about it in terms of sin. I mean, in any of our lives, all of our lives, I can speak for myself, we sin. We fall into doing things, thinking things, being places, participating, whatever, saying things that we should not say, and we're failing. But in the midst of that failure, are we not haunted by the fact that we know that we might be doing something, saying something, thinking something, being somewhere that we shouldn't be? Sure we are. So it's not a thing where our loyalty is being questioned or being challenged in some way. What about this second statement Jesus gives here? He talks about the swords and the purses. That's kind of a weird statement. But when you think about it, it's really not. When the 70 were sent out, that's what Jesus was referring to. When He sent 70 out, 2 by 2, they went all over the place. He told them, don't carry money, don't carry extra anything, don't carry a sword, don't carry any of that stuff. He provided for them in a way that was supernatural. They went out and they lacked nothing. But things are fixing to change. Jesus is not going to be physically with them any longer. And what He's getting at is here the same thing He would say to you and me. He would say, the practical stuff matters. Don't neglect it. Don't pretend like the practical stuff doesn't matter. When you come to a moment where you're out of your depth, I'll be there for you, but be sensible. I mean, I remember, I probably told you this story before. We used to travel with a guy named Tony Campolo. And if you ever read one of Tony Campolo's books or go and hear Tony Campolo, you will want to do what I wanted to do. And I heard him 100 times. We used to travel with him. He had this sermon that he did. I heard it about 100 times, same sermon. When you're an evangelist, all you got to have is 5 sermons. You can travel for years because you go to different places all the time and nobody's heard you before. Tony would tell this story about, and he did this one time in a church where the parking lot was full of cars with windshield wipers on the headlights. I mean, these were expensive cars. The cars, all of them, cost more than I'd make in 3 years of working if I took all the money and bought the car. And he told them this. He said, "What are you doing with that car?" Just imagine. Now you got all these people sitting out there in suits and fancy dresses. What are you doing with that car? He said, I have a $5,000 Buick that I bought used. He said, it'll go as fast as your car will on the highway. It's got air conditioning, got cloth seats, got a heater. It's got a radio too. He said, I can go anywhere you can go in my car that you can go in that car. He said, now if you sold that car and bought my car, you could take that other $110,000 and you could support 20 missionaries in 20 countries all over the world for the rest of their lives. What are you doing with that car? And you could have heard a fly burp on the back wall when he said stuff like that. He said stuff like that all the time. Well, when I heard that, I heard I need to sell everything I own. I need to take all the money and go down to first stop is Goodwill and buy a bed sheet and cut a hole in the top of it and then sell the clothes I'm wearing. And then take all the money left over and go buy Bibles and go down to the coldest, nastiest, most horrible street corner I can find and give them away until I die. That's how I heard Tony Campolo. That's not the way you're supposed to hear Tony Campolo. And that's not what Jesus is saying here. He's saying, look, you're going to need a sword. You may need your money bag. You may need your sandals. I'm going to send you out now, and I'm not going to be there, and it's not going to be the same as it was. I'm going to live in you, but you're going to be in the world. Meaning, in this particular moment, when Jesus predicts that Peter is going to fail, the meaning of that is very different with Peter standing there and his chest out saying, I'd go to my death for you, Lord, than when they're standing there with the swords pointed at Peter. Very different. Lots of times, you and I will, in Christian settings, when we're faced with what I call the Columbine hypothetical, we'll throw our chest out and say, oh, I'd take the bullet. Maybe. Somebody sticks an AK-47 against your forehead and says, are you a Christian? It's going to feel very different than it does sitting in this nice, warmer room now than it would feel then. Very different. But Peter's, in his failure, you got to remember he is not disloyal. How do I know that? Well, if you look at the next text we're coming up to next week, you'll find Peter in the courtyard in a very dangerous place. In fact, he's one of the two disciples that follow Jesus all the way up to the trial, his first trial. He's following him knowing that it's dangerous. He's there in the garden when all the soldiers come to get Jesus. He defends Jesus. Peter's not a scaredy cat. Peter's got a lot of courage, but he doesn't understand what he's going to face at all. And here's something very interesting about human nature. Let's just say that you told me something about your life that you're really excited about. All right, you come to me and you say, Rip, this happened. And I say, I am so happy for you. That's how you hear that, okay? I am so happy for you. 6 little words. But if I say it this way, I'm really happy for you. I'm so happy for you. Or if I say, I'm so happy for you. Same words, they mean something very, very different. When Peter faces Jesus here and Jesus says, I've prayed for you, Satan wants to sift you like wheat. And when you fail, you'll come back and you'll be a blessing to your brothers. He's not saying that with anger. He's saying that with real sadness because he knows that this is going to really happen. And he's sad for Peter. What a difference between words. Think about this. Let's say, here's a hypothetical, a man cheats on his wife blatantly and gets caught. If he goes home and his wife meets him in the doorway with a frying pan and starts wailing on him and screaming at him, that's terrible. Nobody wants that, but it's way easier than if he greets his wife at the door with 2 little children in tow and everybody's weeping because they can't believe what Dad has done to their family. That's going to hurt a lot worse than the frying pan. And Jesus' words here, I would say, were laden with sorrow. Peter's confused by it. He doesn't understand what's coming. Everything's a shock to him. The whole thing's going to be a shock to him. The soldiers haven't gotten there yet. And Peter's being told by Jesus what's going to happen, but in being told, he just can't, we couldn't either, put these pieces together and understand what this is going to mean. It's going to be a shock. And Jesus is going to take them to the place of prayer next week, and they're going to be challenged in this way. But this is what I want to focus on this morning. This is the point at which we talk about, all right, Christmas as a turning point in history, and it is. We talk about Jesus' ministry when he's at the River Jordan and John baptizes him, a turning point in history, and it is. We talk about Jesus being arrested, and it's a turning point in history, and it is. We talk about him on the cross, it's a turning point in history. We talk about the resurrection, it's a turning point in history for sure. There's another turning point in history coming, and that's Jesus in the garden. A lot of stuff happens in the Bible in gardens, doesn't it? Jesus is going to be at his weakest point, just like he was in the temptation. 40 days no food, and Satan comes to tempt him. He's going to be at that point again because Jesus knows what's coming. He can see all of it in front of him. Imagine. Now go back for a minute in your mind to the Columbine hypothetical. All right, somebody burst through the doors. They got an AK-47. Colin can't get his heater out of his pocket quick enough. Or anybody else who's carrying. Can't get it out fast enough to take care of all of us. Or maybe they come to Colin first. I don't know. But they stick the AK-47 up to one of us and they say, "Are you a Christian?" Now think about that and think about it a day prior. And the person comes to you, Jesus, and he says, "This is what's going to happen." How would it feel for you or for me to think about that during those moments of that day, knowing what's coming? And that we had to choose. And we're going to be faced with that choice. Jesus was like that. He knew what was coming. He goes to the garden to pray, facing a binary choice. He can say no to God and go have a good Jewish guy's life, probably get married, have children, live his life out. Or he can say yes to God and face everything he knows is coming when he says yes. Man, that's a lot different to me than being faced in the moment when I'm not expecting it. Jesus expects all of this. He knows he's got to make up his mind to do this. Now, how do you think Jesus said the words that he's going to say next week, "Your will be done"? How do you think he said that? You think he said in like despair, just resignation, "Oh, I guess your will be done"? Or he says, totally defeated, "Your will be done"? Or he says in utter frustration, thinking about that other life he could have, "I guess your will's got to be done"? Or he says it with just total regret, "Oh well, I can't change anything, I guess your will's got to be done"? I don't think he said it like that at all. And here's where I want to funnel this down for you and me. Jesus has made himself ready here. He's going to go to the garden, he's going to pray, and he's going to make himself ready. And that's the same making himself ready that you and I can do. It's exactly the same. Any of us. Jesus goes and visits with the Father. And you and I can do the same thing. At points in our life where things are just, we're out of our depth. We don't have it to do what we have to do. We don't have it to go through what we think we can't go through. We don't have it to face what we might face. But we can go to the Father too, just like Jesus did. I remember in Pennsylvania we had this woman. She was pregnant. Twins. And they were in one amniotic sac. Doctors told her, "You're going to have to let us take one of these out or they're not going to live." Now, I don't understand, I'm not the gynecologist, but my understanding is it's got something to do with the impurities in the amniotic fluid that would come because of the two babies both using that fluid as their living quarters. They said, "We've got to reduce the pregnancy." So this woman came forward in church and told us the story and said, "Would you pray for us?" And I was up there with them and I just had this image of Jackson. How when he was really little and he came upon something that was super scary. You know, when you're this tall, a dog that's as tall as you are is super scary. Mm-hmm. And when he would be super scared and Becky and I would be there, he would get one of us and wrap his arms around our legs and get behind us. And I thought, that's what she's going to do with God right now, because she's super scared about these babies. That's exactly what I think Jesus did. Can you imagine knowing what's coming and knowing that you've got to make up your mind to say yes to it? But that's the same opportunity everybody in this room has. I mean, I know we feel ourselves independent because we're Americans. And we feel ourselves able to take care of stuff, and we feel like we can go through stuff. But when you sit down in front of a doctor and the doctor says, probably 6 months, that's very different, isn't it? Or they say that to somebody you really love, like a child. Do I believe that in those moments, God is going to come through for us? Do we really believe it? There is going to be, for everybody in this room, an insurmountable. People say, what disease do you think you'll die of? I know what the answer to that is. I know the answer. I know what disease will kill each of us in this room. It'll be our last one. The last one. And think about it as a parent looking ahead to a completely wayward child, how that hurts. There are so many things that we can encounter that are just insurmountable for us, we feel. I can't do that. I've said that to God about our own son. Can't do that. I remember I was working this week for a guy who has a grown child, and then grandchildren, and the grandchildren are grown. And I had my tools all over his lawn, and I had to go home for lunch for a reason I don't remember right now, but anyway, other than eating. And I was putting some of the expensive stuff back in my truck. He said, oh, nobody's going to bother that here. He said, nobody will steal anything unless it's my grandchildren. And I thought he was joking. I just thought, you don't mean that. He said, oh, no. He said, my grandchildren, my grandson and his girlfriend are both drug addicts, and when they come to my house, they steal every time they show up. Now, just think how he feels and how his son, the father of that child, feels. It's an insurmountable. It's something that you and I just look at and say, I cannot face that. Peter is going to face an insurmountable, and he's going to fail. But he's going to learn something that he could not learn any other way. In the very text we read this morning, what does it say? You're going to deny me, but when you've been restored, you'll strengthen the people around you. You'll strengthen your brothers. See, these things in which we really, really fail, God takes them. I'm not saying they're good things. Don't misunderstand me. I mean, the stuff that I did in my life, people have said to me, oh, Rip, that's wonderful you did all that because you wouldn't be who you are. I say, I'd have been better. But they're there, and I can't fix them. But God takes those things, and He gives us elements of our being that we could not have had we not faced them. Peter's going to fail. And Peter would not be the Peter he needed to be after Pentecost had he not failed here. Jesus took that and used it. He's going to become a comfort to people that he could not have comforted had he not failed. I used to work with a guy, pastor, who had a totally charmed life. Totally charmed. Raised in a wealthy home. Went to college, 2 other siblings. They were all charmed. Everybody was happy. It was a great life, great father, great mother, believers. Everything was great. Went to college, graduated with honors, went to seminary, got out, started pastoring, and then got involved in counseling. And so I was working with the guy. He would invite me to come and sit in on these sessions. And there was this one couple that they were ready to split up. And the woman was sitting there, and my friend was speaking with her, and she was taking the same courses in counseling at the seminary that my friend had taken. She knew everything he knew, and she was questioning him. And all of a sudden, my friend jumped up out of the seat and just lit into this woman. And I felt hot sweat just pop out of my face. What was going on? My friend had never gone through the things that she was going through. So he had no clue how to relate to somebody going through those things. And so for him, it just made him angry that she was not listening to what he was saying. That's what Peter may have been, but God let Peter fail so that Peter could learn to be somebody who could be somebody for another person who was suffering, and he could be a comfort to them in no way he could have ever comforted them had he not failed. It's not always a bad thing to fail. God will take it and use it. I don't know